This next section is about different kinds of policy, monetary policy, and how the Fed is involved in that, fiscal policy, and also why it's hard to control the economy. So first off, let's talk a little bit about monetary policy. And monetary policy is the government's involvement in affecting the supply of money in private hands. So we know that the federal government is in control of not only making the money, but circulating it. And they're also involved in a lot of ways of sort of adjusting or changing monetary values. One theory or one philosophy is monetarism. And monetarism is an economic theory that the supply of money is the key to the economic health of the nation. And if there's too much cash and too much credit available, then that can produce inflation. So monetarists are conservative-minded economists or people who are really concerned about inflation. And the idea that that monetarists hold is that it's important for the money supply not to exceed the GDP, because if the money supply is too high, if there's too much money in circulation, then that affects the interest rates in negative ways. The main government regulator of money is the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve System that was created by Congress in 1913. And that's the government organization that controls the banks, the main federal banks, and creates monetary policy and lending practices of banks. In 2006, Ben Bernanke became the chair of the Fed, and he was Fed chair really through the mid-2010s. And Bernanke replaced Alan Greenspan, who was the Fed chair before him. There was a Fed chair is, I think, actually all the members of the Fed hold 14-year terms, and the Fed chair holds maybe 4-year terms. I'd have to go back and take a look at that because I can't remember. But the Board of Governors of the Fed are the ones that make all of the decisions about things like the supply of money and also interest rates on banks. One of the most important interest rates is the federal funds rate. The federal funds rate is the percentage rate of loans from one bank to another bank for overnight loans. And the reason that banks need to have or take out overnight loans is because by law they're required to have a certain amount of money available. They can't have it lent out. They have to have it. And in order to make that happen, sometimes banks have to borrow money from other banks. It's just that they have to do it just overnight. So the federal funds rate is that. The Fed buys and sells government bonds just like anybody else. The thing is that they have the power to, decide themselves on how many bonds they can hold. And because they can buy and sell bonds, that determines the amount of monies banks actually have available to lend out. Borrowing's cheaper when banks have a lot more money, and it tends to be more expensive when they have less money. So the Fed can regulate the interest rates of money by buying and selling government bonds. The higher the interest rate, the less likely it is that companies will take out loans. They're more likely to save their money. And so that's one of the ways that the Fed sort of controls the economy. There are two main fiscal policies, Keynesian versus supply-side economics. And when we talk about fiscal policy is the use of the federal budget to influence the economy. And it's Congress and the President that ultimately make these fiscal decisions, while the Fed makes decisions about monetary policy.